Good day, everybody. This is Yin Yang in California with Morsels of a Thought number 1576. We have got Stoics on Saturday. Stoic Saturday is for currently Epictetus. We have read we have read we have read Marcus Aurelius meditations already, and now we are going into how he was as a teacher, Epictetus. So let's jump right in. And in Epictetus's day, there was no Stoic school as such. No particular person recognized as the head of the school or particular city where one went to study this brand of philosophy. So you became a teacher without official accreditation and made a living at it only if you became recognized as good at it. To claim that you were a teacher of Stoicism, you based your teaching firmly on the early Stoics and, above all, on the works of Chrysippus, Chrysippus, the third head of the school in the 3rd century BCE, before Common Era, who was its primary and most important theoretician. This is exact this is exactly what Epictetus did. Chrysippus is mentioned many times in the Discourses, and his written work formed the basis of the curriculum. Philosophy in Epictetus's time differed in certain respects from its modern counterpart. Modern philosophy is pursued in classrooms, seminars, and the written word, and much of it consists of analyzing abstract concepts and arguments, but much ancient philosophy, especially in the post-classical centuries, was philosophy to live by and practice daily. It was supposed to purge you from your base attachments and make you a better person. It was supposed to help you cope with difficulties you encountered and things that might disturb your equanimity. So over the decades before Epictetus, certain topics, old age, death, anger, poverty, exile, were regularly discussed and analyzed with a view to finding out how to cope with them. This therapeutic and consolatory philosophy is what Epictetus taught in the afternoons. Throughout discourses, we find him encouraging his listeners to regard illness, death, and so on as indifference, TS, as things that should not trouble us or contribute in any way toward our happiness or misery. There's a footnote with this. But his framework was Stoicism, and he was teaching in rivalry to Epicureans, skeptics, and cynics. These are all capitalized. So the terms skeptic and cynic, Epicurean, these are all originally named after um, certain concepts. So they were capitalized. Epictetus explicitly attacks Epicureanism and skepticism. 1.5, 1.23, 1.27.15, 2.20, 2.22, 2.21, 2.23 through 2.23.20 through 22, 3.7. But along with many other Stoics, he thought highly of cynicism, the most ascetic and radical of the philosophical traditions. That's 3.22. All the schools agreed on the therapeutic aim of philosophy, so a student would attach himself to Stoicism not just because it was advertising its therapeutic effectiveness, but because of what distinguished it from other schools, its entire world view. Moreover, unlike its chief rival, Epicureanism, Stoicism encouraged participation in public life, and that would have been attractive to some students. Over the centuries before Epictetus's time, then, philosophy had gone in two directions. High philosophy, as we may call it, was the impersonal presentation of often very subtle ideas and arguments. Some of the work of the Stoics, for instance, on logic and epistemology is as challenging as philosophical work of any era. Low philosophy, on the other hand, was the attempt to make philosophy practical and accessible to the common man and woman. Common man and woman. Both high and low philosophy were taught at Epictetus's school, as we have seen, but only his discourses remain, and in these, Epictetus was focused entirely on therapeutic or low philosophy, on his students' ethical development, or, in other words, on curing the erroneous judgments that were causing their attachment to the external world. His students were sick, and his teaching held the cure. 2.2 1.15 through 22, 3.23.30 through 32. Epictetus is liberal with his analogies, but those based on the field of medicine are among the most striking. Since Epictetus believed that everyone has the natural capacity to develop and perfect reason, which is the route to happiness, his teaching methods are designed to elicit that realization in his students and then put it to work. He is always concerned to encourage students or to eradicate their false beliefs or to get them to accept advice. To these ends, he naturally used argument, especially of a Socratic kind, question and answer, but also less rational and more rhetorical methods. Most strikingly, he employed the shock tactics of reproof and abuse. He could be merciless even with some of the casual visitors, 2.4, 2.14, 2.24, 3.7. He tears into members of his audience, serious students and laymen alike, exposing their pretensions, picking the bubbles of their conceit and complacency, grounding them in reality. He addresses them as slaves or wretches and calls them blind. He makes it clear to his students that none of them is the ideal student that he would like to have. 2.16.17, 2.17.29 through 30, 2.19.20 through 28, 3.6.4. So I am reading you those numbers because I figure that anybody who is taking notes will be able to go to the discourses and find them. Excuse I'm wearing stripes today. I have had hand surgery, that's why. So you don't have to see the stitches. Mhm. This abrasiveness is justified at 3.1.10 through 1.5. It is a philosopher's duty to make a potential student see the disgraceful state he is in. Epictetus wanted to upset his students. If a philosopher's words, quote, if a philosopher's words fail to produce the realization that the listener is in a bad way, they're lifeless and the speaker's a corpse too. 3.2, 3.28. One should leave the doctor's office in pain, 3.2, 3.30 through 32. The effective teacher is one like Musonius Rufus, who enables people to see their flaws, 3.2, 3.29. A good talk is one that makes a student worried about himself and determined to change his ways. 3.2, 3.37. Epictetus believed that every human being has an innate sense of self-respect. Adi, aidos, 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 close to our notion of a conscience, and tried to use that as a trigger to get his students to correct their lives. He also believed that all of us, whatever our circumstances, are innately programmed to form certain moral conceptions that give us, among other things, the ability to distinguish good from bad. See especially 1.22. These two beliefs meant that he placed the burden of the work on his students themselves. It was his job in the discourses to arouse in them the desire to undertake the work that was required for them to correct themselves. Work on oneself must take place not only in a school environment, but more importantly, at every moment of every day. That was a cat. Epictetus comes across as a forceful personality, and the discourses are intense and fast paced. So fast occasionally that it is hard to follow the train of thought. Sentences are short, even staccato. His Greek is colloquial. See the ironic comment at 3.9.14. Conversational and often powerfully expressive and metaphorical. Analogies abound from the natural world, and like his hero Socrates, he employs homely examples to illustrate his points. The arts and crafts, games and sports, cracked jars, chamber pots, runny noses, ears of wheat, dinner parties, hunted deer. Anecdotes concerning famous people from the past demonstrate that people with political power are not as powerful as they think, and characters from myth and legend demonstrate that the events of their lives were due to faulty judgments. Socratic-like dialogue, often rapid fire, is a common idiom as he answers his own questions or puts objections into the mouths of imaginary interlocutors and refutes them. An interlocutor is somebody who's talking in between. Loquacious is to speak a lot. Okay. His tone of voice frequently changes, and we have to remember that originally these were live talks, some even delivered while strolling in the open air. The talks would have been accompanied by gestures, pauses, facial expressions, and other body language. Epictetus uses irony a lot, and without hearing him in person, it is sometimes hard to know whether or not a given passage is ironic. He argues logically less than he makes use of parallels, so the validity of many of his points depends on the validity of the parallels. The anecdotes, quotations, and examples leaven the serious subject matter, as do occasional flashes of humor, which can be quite acerbic. 2.20.29 through 30, but there are also considerable stretches of argument. His constant and somewhat heavy-handed employment of imperatives and pointed rhetorical questions peppered with insults frequently makes him sound like a street preacher and turns his talks into harangues. His listeners must sometimes have felt pummeled by his relentless questioning and driving home of consequences and his repetition of key points. But Epictetus was not claiming to be perfect himself. He is merely God's mouthpiece, 3.1.36. He is capable of laziness, 1.10.8. Number 12, and weakness, 2.8.24. He has not achieved freedom, 4.1.151. He does not altogether put theory into practice, Handbook 49. And in general, there is still work to do, 4.8.43, 4.10.13. Sometimes when he is pointing out faults, he includes himself among his students, along with his students by saying we, e.g., 2.9.21, 2.16.2, 3.23.10, 4.5.36. All in all, the discourses bear the marks of a passionate and effective teacher. So there's a sketch on Stoicism that I want to go into next week. I'm going to jump into content right now, but he speaks. So in the discourses, I'm going to go to book 1, discourse number 30. What we should have what we should have at hand in difficult circumstances is the topic here. If you've ever If you're ever in the presence of a powerful man, remember that someone else is looking down from on high at what's going on and that it's him you have to please rather than that man. So he asks you, in your school, what did you call exile, imprisonment, shackles, death, and disfavor? I called them indifference. And how are you thinking of them right now? Have they changed at all? No. Well, have you changed? No. So tell me what the indifferents are and also what the consequences are. Indifference are things that aren't subject to will, and the consequence is that they're nothing to me. Now, tell me what things you took to be good. Right exercises of will and right use of impressions. And what is the goal? To follow you. And do you think the same way even now? Yes, I do. So here he's talking to a student, and the student is supposed to take different things in difference, um, and include those horrible things, um, exile, imprisonment, and shackles, and death, and disfavor. Wow. Whoops. That's bookmark. Oh my God. Okay. And then one more paragraph of this particular content, and then we will jump into something else. Go into him then with confidence, bearing all this in mind, and you'll see what it is for a young man who's been properly trained to be among people with no education. I imagine by the gods that your experience will be something like this. Why do we bother with such long and complicated preparations when it's all for nothing? Is that all power is? Is that all there is to the antechambers, the chamberlains, the armed guards? Was it for this that I listened to so many lectures? They all amount to nothing, but I prepared myself as though they were important. Interesting. So that has been book one we have gone into. I think I jumped into book one originally without going to the beginning of it, but we can go to the preface now. The preface is only one paragraph, and then I'm going to go into the beginning of book one, which we've just read the 30th one of. Okay, so here's the preface. Arrian, Arrian, to Lucius Gellius, greetings, Gellius, Gellius. I did not write these talks by Epictetus in the sense that one might normally be said to write such things. That's the translator Robin Waterfield saying this. Nor did I publish them under my own name, seeing that I am not claiming to be the author. What I did try was to write down everything I heard him say in his own words as far as possible, so as to have a record of his ideas and his blunt way of talking for my own future use. This is Arrian speaking. Sorry, Arrian to Lucius Gallius. Okay, that's not Waterfield. Sorry. Their style, then, is what one might expect of spontaneous speech rather than a careful composition for people to read later. This is the form in which they have somehow ended up, without my consent or knowledge, in the public domain. It hardly matters to me if I come across as an incompetent writer, and it matters little to Epictetus if the style of the discourses is disparaged, since there can be no doubt that his sole purpose in speaking was to incline the minds of his listeners toward goodness. So, if these discourses were to have the same effect, they would, I think, be doing what the words of philosophers should do. And even if they fail in this respect, readers should appreciate that whenever Epictetus spoke, his listeners inevitably felt exactly what he intended them to feel. If the discourses on their own prove not to have this effect, that is either my fault or possibly unavoidable. Farewell, he writes that. And book one, number one is really long. Number two, how to preserve conformity with one's role in every situation, is long. And number three, how one may proceed from the fact that God is the father of humankind to its consequences. Okay, 1.3. If one, quote, if one could fully and properly assimilate the idea that we're all principally children of God, that God is the father of both human beings and gods, I doubt he'd ever think of himself as base or despicable. If Caesar, were to adopt you, you'd be insufferably arrogant. So how could it fail to be a source of pride if you knew you were a son of God? But as things are, that's not what happens. Two components are intermingled in us at birth: the body, which we have in common with animals, and reason and intelligence, which we have in common with gods. And while most of us gravitate toward a relationship with the body, a wretched and lifeless thing, few incline toward the divine and blessed component. So, since all of us, whoever we may be, can only regard things on the basis of our opinions about them, those few who think they were born for trustworthiness, self respect, and unassailability in their use of impressions don't think of themselves as despicable or base, whilst most people do. While most people do. Quote, "What am I, after all?" they cry. "A miserable little creature." And, "Oh, my wretched body." You're right. It is wretched, but you also have something better than the body. So, why are you ignoring that and clinging to the body? This kinship with the body is the reason why some of us, having gravitated in that direction, become like wolves, deceptive, cunning, and pernicious, and others like lions, fierce, brutal, and wild, while most of us are foxes and other forms of wretched animal life. I mean, isn't four the perfect description of a scurrilous and malicious person, unless he's some lower and more wretched creature? So be careful and make sure that you don't turn out to be one of these wretched creatures. So it says that we are trying to rise to the level of our connection with God. That is a goal here. This section was called How One May Proceed from the fact that God is the father of humankind to its consequences. So how we may proceed from that fact to its consequences. God is the father of humankind. It means that we are different from animals in such a way that we have a rational mind. The human being has a rational mind. That is what we say distinguishes us from animals, although I would say that it was just speech. That animals may have a rational mind too. They just don't have words and speech to describe themselves. So I would argue that certain animals and even bugs have a rational mind. And I wonder if they're like a Chromebook because their brain is so little, like a speck of a pinhead, head of a pin. And goodness gracious, they must be using Chromebook technology to think, you know? That's what I think. Connected to the bugs. Maybe that wasn't the point. That. Anyway, so I will have another show for my jewelry at 8 o'clock, which will be in almost 90 minutes. And I will be selling some more of the paparazzi jewelry at 8 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time. I would like to separate my yin yang morsels of a thought with the house cat tracks business. And so today I have requested a channel from house cat tracks from YouTube. So anyway, that's what's going on. All right, I will talk to you later. Okay, old Kinderhook. Bye bye.